What I think is most interesting about it, though, is it upends the business model that Silicon Valley had been trying to win the AI race.
One thing that is interesting to watch is what happens with NVIDIA with its, 90% margins. This could be very dangerous for NVIDIA in the long run.
The more possible cases will be that China and the US are leading in their own perspectives, the tech industry, and each has their own unique advantages.
The Chat Lounge. Chat Lounge.
Chat Lounge.
The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Welcome to the Chat Lounge. I'm Tian, joining our discussion on the open source AI bombshell DeepSeek R. Professor Toby Walsh, Chief Scientist from the AI Institute, University of New South Wales, Australia. Andy Mok, a Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, and Chen Jiahe, the Chief Investment Officer of Beijing-based Novem Arcae Technologies. It's a great pleasure to have you all on the chat. Gentlemen, welcome. Wall Street has been stunned. A Chinese quantitative hedge fund called High Flyer fueled a massive sell-off of tech stocks, not with quant trading, but with the release of the latest version of its large language model, DeepSeek R1. It performs on par with OpenAI's O1 model, which is its most advanced model across complex reasoning benchmarks on reduced chip levels at much lower costs. Well, let's first take a close look at the deep water bomb dropped by High Flyer. First question goes to you all. So what's your evaluation of DeepSeek's performance, especially compared to OpenAI's ChatGPT? I checked the comments on Chinese social media. Some say it's fabulous and highly capable of even composing articles in classical Chinese, but some feel disappointed, saying it didn't work that well as GPT does. So what's your assessment then? Professor Walsh, it's your first time on the show. Shall we start with you, please?
Yeah, well, I think hats off to the young and small team at DeepSeek for pulling this off. Mm. The performance is very comparable to the best of the West. Some way it may be better, some places it may be worse. But the fact that they've been able to do it demonstrates the view that various people had that China was behind, 6 months or more behind the US, is actually false, that China is right up there with the best tech companies in the US. Mm-hmm. And then I think what's most impressive about it is not the performance, because performance is, I say, very comparable to existing models like the best ones from OpenAI, but that they did it with way less compute. It's claimed that they used about $6 million to train it. That's a 20th at least a 20th of what was used to train those comparable Western models. So that really does open up huge, great opportunities, and also was the reason there was that vast correction on tech stocks, that people realized that the West wasn't necessarily going to win, and maybe there was a better, more efficient model that was available elsewhere.
You used it yourself, right? What kind of questions did you ask? Can you share with us?
It took a while to use, because there was it's become the most popular app on the App Store. Number one download overtook ChatGPT. So there was a bit of a backlog to get yourself registered. So it took about a day to actually get access. But when I did get access, I tried it out on all the little trick reasoning questions that normally trip up smaller models. I wasn't actually able to trip it up that easily. So I was actually quite impressed by its performance. It's also worth out, two other things to be impressed by its performance. One is that it's open. You can download it and run it on your own computer.
Indeed.
Completely free. And that they've been able to do it, in such a compact way. So I think it's, as I said, hats off to the team.
Yeah, the reasoning process is quite interesting. And what about Andy?
Well, Tuyun, I have to say that on one hand, this is a surprise, but in a more important way, this is no surprise at all.
Why?
Of course, there's been a lot of rhetoric about China being behind on AI. So from this perspective, I think many people were stunned, especially in the Western world. But when we look at the broader picture of China's interaction with the West, since 1949, the establishment of New China. This is just the latest incident. So let's go back to Tianjie-sun, right, with the China developing capabilities in the atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb, launching a satellite. And again, if we go back to that time period, the United States was aghast that poor, backwards China was able to do this. If we fast forward, more recently to Huawei, again, that Huawei not only survived, but thrived against this unprecedented attack by a nation state against a private company. And similarly, we see DeepSeek here doing something that no one thought was possible. At a more macro conceptual level, I think we ought not to be too surprised. Now, let me talk a little bit about the AI part of this, which also I think suggests that we perhaps should not be too surprised by this. So senior executive scientists in this field, from Sam Altman to many others, have said that when you look at the three components of artificial intelligence breakthroughs, hardware, algorithms, and data, it's algorithms that lead to the biggest breakthroughs, not necessarily hardware. And we only need to look at what enabled these breakthroughs in large language models, generative AI, was an algorithmic breakthrough, in a paper that was very, very cleverly titled, "Attention is All You Need." So when we look at the deep and broad pool of scientific talent in China, China graduates 2x the number of STEM PhDs that the United States does. The intensity, the ferocity of the competition in China, the rigor of its educational system. Again, I think we should not be too surprised when we see algorithmic breakthroughs coming from China.
But can you give us some example of you yourself using it, which you might think it's quite convenient or not so convenient?
Sure. So I am not a scientist in AI. I would probably call myself a power user.
Right.
So I use pretty much every model available on the market. They all have their strengths, relative weaknesses. I would say that DeepSeek is very much competitive. Again, only speaking from the perspective of the user. So I, have no complaints. I think as an analyst, the thing that is most important is one, that they were able to do this using only about what they claim is about 2,000 H800 NVIDIA chips, which are much less powerful and, of course, a fraction of the number of chips that other major players have used. And second, that they made it open source, meaning that anyone can use it and anyone can check their work. The last thing I want to say that I think is actually the most important is more from a geopolitical perspective. Not only that it caused the largest stock market decline in history, something like 600 billion, right, of NVIDIA in a single day, but what we're witnessing is a sea change in attitudes towards China. Mark Andreessen, who developed the first internet browser and now is one of the founding partners of Andreessen Horowitz, a top Silicon Valley VC fund, has been known to be a staunch China hawk. Very few good things to say about China. And even when I've talked to him, I've been stunned by how reflexively negative he has been in the past about China. And he recently posted on X that DeepSeek's model is an amazing contribution to mankind. So let that sink in for a second. Someone who is as well respected, as vociferous a critic of China, could say something so positive in an unqualified way about a Chinese company, a Chinese technology, I think is going to have long-lasting geopolitical ramifications, just like we're seeing with TikTok and the reversal of the stance of TikTok by President Trump and other senior American politicians.
Right, you've had a very comprehensive evaluation of that, but there is some twist as well, because OpenAI is now saying that the DeepSeek used some technique called distillation, which violate the contract. And we'll come to that later on. But to Jiahe, what's your evaluation? Have you used it and compare it with other large language models like ChatGPT?
Yeah, I have been using this DeepSeek recently. Yeah, I've been using it almost every day. I found a very good way of using it is that if you are searching some very basic concept, it gets you very perfect answer. For example, I got one of my majors reading through the Chinese traditional literatures, which were written about 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. I read them about half an hour or 1 hour every day. It's a bit like Westerners reading Latins, So it's in these kind of traditional literatures, there are many words that are not used in today's Chinese language, not at all. I just don't know what they mean. Previously, I have to check through the dictionary when I was a high school student. Later on, we used the search engine for searching these Chinese traditional characters. But search engines really don't tell you the very exact answers. They lead you to an online dictionary, but you have to go through this dictionary by yourself again. But nowadays, by using this DeepSeek, it's really amazing. It just tells you exactly the answer of these characters. So to me, it's more like serving like a modern dictionary. For example, I asked them what's the English expression of the Mac 7, the large 7 tech companies. It tells you the very good answer. So if you ask them the very basic answer, either it's OpenAI or ChatGPT or DeepSeek, they really give you very good answer. So it's a very good assistant. But on the other hand, the question is that if you ask them more complicated questions, it doesn't really have to be too complicated. For example, I asked the DeepSeek this morning, what's the current valuation of the Mac 7 companies? Well, I thought maybe I don't have to bother myself to go through each one of their ticker in the financial terminal, so I can just get the answer in one sheet. I asked the DeepSeek, what's the valuation of the Mac 7 this morning? And I specifically said I want the PE ratio, and it gave me the answer that was the valuation of these 7 companies in last May. So it's about 8 months ago. So it's exactly not the answer I wanted. So this is you can look at this is that if you ask them more basic questions about the basic concepts, they give you very exact answer. But if you ask them a more complicated question, especially a question that's not deriving the answer simply from some literatures, but asking the computer to think, to really think, you can get very tricky answers.
Was it because it's database, it's not that updated?
It actually gave me the answer that was the valuation of May 2024. And especially when you consider is that this company is claiming that we are the leading AI, and this financial data is up to date every single day. You can just read it freely from any financial website. It's just there. I spend about 5 seconds and find myself there. I think this is my experience with using this kind of AI program, DeepSeek, OpenAI, is that you can ask them very, very basic questions and they give you a very exact answer, and it's a very good answer, and you can rely on that. But if you ask them a bit more complicated questions, then you don't get a very good answer at all, and you can't trust that. So you say, okay, you give me an answer with 80% accuracy. I better spend some time myself to find the 100% accurate answer. I can't rely on the 80% answer, if you see what I mean.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
But maybe it excels in Chinese literature rather than finance. But I got a classic question, which is, which number is bigger, 3.11 or 3.8? It gave very good reasoning and got the right answer. All right, and obviously, generally speaking, I think you all have a relatively high, I should say, evaluation of this new model. But Jiahe, since you're in the investment field, you might be able to answer this. Why is a hedge fund able to make such a big breakthrough in AI? That's a big question for a lot of us, right?
Yeah, that is really amazing. It really tells you how strong the hedge funds really are. Especially when we talk about the quant funds, because this high flyer fund has been very famous in China for their achievement in the quantitative investment field. They've been using quite a lot of computers. They've been programming very good programs, these kind of things. So they have been working in this field for a long period of time. Now they're turning their programming capability to the AI. Well, I think that's probably the same thing for their investment, because you have to understand one thing is that in the quants world, they're not just talking about understanding the price, the financial data, these kind of things. What they are doing in some cases is that they're trying to understand what's happening on the internet. And with this understanding, which means they have to understand all the literatures and languages that people are using. Traditional investors, especially those investors that are following the daily movement of the market, what they are doing is that they read through the newspaper in the morning and they find out what's going on. Then they make their investment decisions in the morning meeting. But in the States news world, there is one thing is that you have news coming out 24 hours a day. So there is a kind of quants program that try to read and understand what's going on the internet second to second. And once they find there is something amazing, they automatically put out the investment decision, which is much faster than what human beings can do. So this is what quants are doing. They try to understand the human language. From this point of view, you can easily understand why a quant fund can do a language model. It's because they have been working on this for a long period of time. They used to understand the language to make money for themselves.
There are a lot of hedge funds in this world, especially, in the States. A lot of them are very influential. Professor Walsh, what's your interpretation of this phenomenon?
Well, in this case, the hedge fund had to pivot because of the trading restrictions that were being put on in China because of the turbulence in the market. So they were looking for something else to turn all of their PhD brains and all of those GPUs that they acquired to good end, and they've been able to do that successfully. What I think is most interesting about it, though, is it upends the business model that Silicon Valley had been trying to win the AI race. The business model was summed up by that slogan: scaling is all that you need. And it'd been a race to see who had the deepest pockets, who could throw the most money at the problem, throw more compute, more data. It was proving to be successful, but somewhat lazy strategy. And what's interesting, what's exciting, is that DeepSeek demonstrates that you can actually get there in a much more efficient way. And it's not going to stop, though, with DeepSeek. The fact that we know you can do it means that lots of other people are going to be able to do this now. It's a bit, I compare it to, it's a bit like running the 4-minute mile. Once the first human, Roger Bannister, ran the first 4-minute mile and proved it was physically possible, lots of people were then able to do it. And the same will be true here. There's already a project on Hugging Face. Hugging Face is this collaborative platform where AI models are shared to rebuild DeepSeek, completely free, completely open, because although the weights of the model of DeepSeek are open, we don't actually know the data it was trained on or some of the finer details. So it's not completely open to the world what DeepSeek have done. So there is a project, and I'm sure they'll succeed in a month or two, recreate it in an entirely open way. And then lots of people are going to do it, not just in China, in Europe, possibly here, and even in Australia.
Right. Something a little bit ironic is that it's developed by some hedge fund, but like Jiahe just mentioned, ironically, it seems not so good at collecting financial information. But hopefully they can solve that problem in the future. But like Professor Walsh just mentioned, there are a lot of questions surrounding how DeepSeek collect data, right? OpenAI CEO Sam Altman initially suggested DeepSeek copy the existing models. And President Trump's AI czar appointee, David Sachs, said there was what he called substantial evidence that DeepSeek distilled outputs from OpenAI models. Professor Walsh, what's your evaluation of that claim then?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that they did. And there's a beautiful irony to this, of course, because OpenAI and all the Western models that have been developed up to now have themselves been trained on data that was obtained, not necessarily without consent. And there's lots of lawsuits going down, class action suits going down in the US at the moment, contesting that. The New York Times is famously suing OpenAI for having trained on all their data. There's some beautiful irony in the fact that OpenAI now has been the victim itself of data from its model being used in the training process for DeepSeek. This idea of distillation, trying to distill the results of another model. In fact, I mean, this is, in a technical sense, this is what's going to happen. Every model in the future is going to be building on the outputs of other models. Indeed, a lot of social media these days is AI generated, a lot of content. So even if you're just scraping the web, not just accessing someone else's model, you're going to be training on the outputs of some other model. So it's almost inevitable that you will be training on other people's output. And indeed, that's partly how we stand on the shoulders of giants. Models get better in part because they can train on the outputs of previous models. Of course, there's question marks about the legality of that and the business sense of that. But from a technical sense, that's the way that it's going to be going down from now moving forwards.
Yes, you can use data collected by other models, but according to OpenAI, such kind of techniques cannot be used for some rival products, right? That's according to they're saying.
The terms and conditions of accessing OpenAI's models are that you can't use it to train a rival product. You can understand from a business sense why they would want to do that. The technical reason why people want to do this is because whilst there's lots of interesting data, facts, and economic prices and things like this that you can train on from the web, there isn't so much of the explanations of how you reason and solve problems. And the latest models, the latest capabilities are because they're better at doing reasoning. They break problems down and work out how to reason through a problem. Now, humans haven't written down how they reason through their problems very much on the web, so there isn't much of that training data. But these models can output that. So this is why they've probably used other models as training data, because they need to get that reasoning training data some way.
Indeed, I actually asked DeepSeek how it works and whether it distills outputs from OpenAI models. The answer, no. And it says, according to DeepSeek's official documentation and public statements, DeepSeek R1 is independently developed using proprietary data sets and training pipelines. It does not rely on distillation or outputs from OpenAI models like GPT-4. It leverages self-generated synthetic data, human annotated data sets, publicly available, legally compliant corpora. And it also notes the model architecture and training methodologies are designed in-house, emphasizing compliance with data privacy and intellectual property regulations. And it also outlines key differentiators from OpenAI models in terms of focus on search integration, language, and domain specialization and regulatory compliance. I'm not saying that its answer is direct evidence that it hasn't done so, but Professor Walsh, can you help us understand what the answer told us, like in layman's terms?
Well, from a legal perspective, that's the answer you would want them to say. The problem is, and this is a criticism that's made not just of DeepSeek, I can make it of all the tech companies, of OpenAI, of Google, is that no one tells you exactly what they've trained on. It would be possible for them to actually itemize, what was exactly the training data. They claim that, it was all publicly available, not copyrighted data that they've trained on. But you have to take their word for it. And indeed, there's suspicions that, the US tech giants themselves have violated people's intellectual property. Indeed, I take this rather personally because I've written a couple of books about AI. I know AI trained on my books. They didn't get my consent, and I've received no compensation for having used my books. So, there are a number of lawsuits from authors like myself protesting the way that they've used our data. And, right now, because of all these lawsuits going down, all of the people building models now are rather quiet on exactly what was the data. They claim that they're doing the right thing, but it's not clear that if they were transparent, then we would know for sure. But since none of them in the US and China are being fully transparent, it's hard to be sure.
This has been the Chat Lounge. When we come back, we'll find out more about the ripple effects DeepSeek may generate on the market. Stay with us.
The strong wind was howling and whistling.
He was the first Chinese citizen to graduate from Yale University in the mid-19th century.
I was born on the 17th of November. She had prominent features. 3 of us were old enough to lend a helping hand.
He navigated between two vastly different cultures and moved further to realize his dream and promote understanding between the people of China and the United States.
Ye Mingxing was a native of Hanyang. I realized no danger. China is really awakening.
Come and join us in discovering the incredible journey of Yong Wang in his autobiography, My Life in China and America. Check out the Audible stories on radio.cgtn.com and all major podcast platforms. Just search for the podcast Books and Beyond and find My Life in China and America.
Welcome back to the Chat Lounge. We continue our chat on the Chinese-developed open-source AI model, DeepSeek. Some, netizens argue OpenAI has long banned Chinese mainland addresses, and do you know how strict the blockade is? If some individuals use OpenAI through some tricky means, it's still possible. But if it used to train another AI with huge amount of data and access, will OpenAI not be able to detect it is the question. And Andy, some are saying that such kind of, accusation is triggered actually by what you just mentioned, the big slide on Wall Street. So what's your take on that then?
Well, I suppose it depends what you mean. So my understanding of distillation is not necessarily that a company is taking data, because data is usually thought of as the input into a model. But my understanding of distillation is using an existing AI model, and in this instance, a large language model, to train your own model. And, we could maybe think of this as a little bit cheating in that, you're already building on something that exists. But, I think conceptually, all scientific advances are based on previous advances. So, I don't know if this is a legal question. Did they violate, if it's OpenAI in this instance, any of their intellectual property rights around their model? I'm not sure of. But conceptually, again, I think any kind of scientific advance is always based on a previous one. I think also, in a way, it seems like a very sensible thing to do, to use something that already exists, right? I mean, why reinvent the wheel? Of course, again, subject to legal constraints, et cetera. I do want to say a couple things here about these models. I do know that some of them do have the ability to do real-time search. For instance, Perplexity is one model that is known to be optimized for research. And OpenAI and even DeepSeek does have a button with a little globe on it where you press to search the web. And I think that is one of the functions of that is designed to give you real-time information, whether that's the latest stock prices, the particular status of an airplane flight, et cetera. So I think there's, it's very much a moving target, in things are developing so quickly, not just at the technology layer, but also at the product feature layer, as these companies better understand what consumers, businesses, governments want in terms of product features. So for me, this is what makes it a very, very exciting time. And just very briefly, I want to share a quick story that to me kind of summarizes this, and that there's an apocryphal story, an American astronaut and a Russian astronaut talking about how they write when they're in space. So the American astronaut is very proud and says, we spent $20 million developing a pen that can work in zero gravity, because we don't need gravity to pull the ink, to the niblet so we can write. We spent $20 million on this, and he's really, really proud. And he says to the Russian, and what did you guys do? The Russian looks at him and says, we used a pencil.
Right.
So I think, again, we see that this is what makes DeepSeek, I think, so important, in that it is not just a breakthrough on its own, but I think it also represents the spirit of the Chinese way of doing things in a very pragmatic and efficient way. And I'll throw in just a very quick technical detail here. So most of the modeling done by OpenAI, Meta, et cetera, use what's called FP32, meaning that they process 32 bits of information. Now, of course, if you're going to use billions and billions of calculations, that matters a lot. Whereas what DeepSeek did is they used 8 bits. And of course, you lose some precision, but they were clever about picking the points where you can still reduce the length of this data by a quarter or to only a quarter without really losing that much precision. And there's a number of these clever hacks or insights that they've done, again, that I think is just emblematic of whether you're looking at electric vehicles, whether you're looking at mobile phones, et cetera, that it's a very pragmatic Chinese approach that really is starting to take the world by storm.
That's also what stunned Wall Street, right? And we've seen, like you all mentioned, the Silicon Valley companies like OpenAI, Meta,
right,
reportedly panicking.
Right. Well, I think this is what's so important, right, in that the paradigm in the U.S. is that you have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe now billions of dollars, training these models. And only a few companies can afford them. And I think what DeepSeek has shown us is that that may not be true. And this has implications not just for the U.S. stock market, but think about the global South now, that this could potentially empower maybe millions of businesses in the global South, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, that could drive, again, accelerate the adoption of AI, right? Because again, it's a well-known, I think it's called Jevons paradox, right? That when you make something more efficient, actually, rather than use less of it, we use much more. So this, in the long run, may actually be positive for tech companies, but certainly in the short term, I think it's caused a lot of panic, as we've seen with the drop in NVIDIA share price.
Right, and actually it triggered some horror scene on Wall Street on Monday. And so Jiahe, you're in the financial business. So do you expect the prices of AI-related shares may continue to crash at such a scale like what we've witnessed on Wall Street?
Well, it's very difficult to say. I mean, quite a lot of people have been arguing that the Nasdaq and these Max 7 are trading a bit too expensive. So, I mean, basically speaking, many news media has been saying that the falling of large US tech companies is because of this DeepSeek that is produced by a small Chinese company. And it looks like China has been hurting the US market, but it's not the case. The DeepSeek is just the one reason. One of the major reasons behind the large correction of these tech companies is basically because they've been trading at a pretty high valuation. I mean, it's not comparable to what the valuation that we have seen in the 2000 dot-com bubble, but it's still a pretty expensive valuation. I mean, if you look at the valuation of the Max 7, they'll be trading at about 30 to 40 times PE ratio. And if you look at the US financial history, I mean, this is a pretty expensive valuation that in many cases they have been too expensive, and in many cases they resulted in a lot of corrections in the past, so these things has been seen. So this valuation basically is what's causing the correction of the market. So when we talk about the future, it's really a tricky question because it's not that expensive comparable to what has been going on in 2000, where we saw 100 times or even 200 times PE ratio. But this time, what we have seen is that it's not that expensive valuation, but it's not cheap at all. I mean, Warren Buffett has been selling Apple, which is one of the cheapest companies in these, Max 7. I mean, Apple is trading at only about 30 plus times PE ratio. It's one of the most profitable companies, but Warren Buffett has been selling that. And if you look in the past, I mean, Warren Buffett has always been correct with his decisions. So if you follow the path of Warren, then you might think about lowering your position in these companies.
Right, good advice. Professor Walsh, Meta Chief's AI scientist Yan LeCun has said that the biggest takeaway from DeepSeek's success was not the heightened threat posed by Chinese competition, but the value of keeping AI models open source so anyone can benefit. It seems you also support such idea. So do you expect DeepSeek may change Sam Altman's mind and make a ChatGPT open source again, maybe in the future?
I I'm not sure that that's going to be enough to change Sam Altman's mind.
All right.
There's a financial aspect to this, which is, what's the best business model? And open source models are very attractive for improving the uptake of these models. But then there are other considerations, the considerations around responsibility. How do you ensure that the technology is used in a responsible way? It's much harder when the models are open source to be able to put in restrictions to prevent people from doing harmful things or saying harmful things or using them to find out the recipes for bioweapons or whatever it is that you want to do because people can quickly remove those restrictions. But certainly, I think it's promising that open source is doing it. I think the other thing is the fact that you can do it with smaller models, not the lazy scaling, throwing money at the problem. And just a historical note, people were really shocked and surprised by DeepSeek. They shouldn't have been, because this isn't the first time that people have demonstrated that you can take a state-of-the-art model and do it with much less resources. When ChatGPT came out back in 2022, the end of 2022, I mean, it cost, I don't know, somewhere we do not exactly saw, but around, somewhere around $30-odd million to train. 6 months later, researchers at the University of California doing some of the tricks that we were just talking about, using lower precision floating point operations, 4-bit and 8-bit arithmetic, not 32-bit, were able to build a ChatGPT clone for $300 of Amazon Web Service credits. So the ultimate target is to run it on your smartphone. The ultimate target is to do it with 20 watts of power, just like the 20 watts of power your brain does. So we're trying to do it with less, and that's always going to make it much easier for the technology to be deployed, is to make it much simpler. So we shouldn't have been as surprised, and the stock market shouldn't have been so troubled that people were starting to do models with way less compute, because we've actually been doing that for the last couple of years. Anytime a model's come out, people have shown you can do it more efficiently sometimes by orders of magnitude.
Like you mentioned, maybe open source has its negative impact to some extent, but it seems DeepSeek, or the founder of DeepSeek, Liang Wenfeng, or the company, decides to keep on going on this path, and who's also said the problem they are facing has never been funding, but the export controls on advanced chips. So let's move on to the outlook or the prospects of DeepSeek. Andy, what are the prospects for DeepSeek against a backdrop of U.S. restrictions or even tighter restrictions on chip exports?
Well, I think it's natural that he would say this. Of course, any company anywhere around the world would be better off if they had unfettered access to top-of-the-line NVIDIA chips. And we have to recognize, too, for Chinese companies, it's politically motivated, but these are just hard to buy. So, one thing that is interesting to watch is what happens with NVIDIA with its, 90% margins, because its high-end, super profitable chips are so in demand. And what DeepSeek is showing is that maybe, the world doesn't need that many of them. So this could be very dangerous for NVIDIA in the long run. But to talk about the future of DeepSeek, I think it's interesting that they have some parallels with Meta, in that one reason I think it's going to be very difficult for a company like OpenAI to go open source is that the way they make their money is by selling access to their AI models, whereas Meta makes their money selling advertising. And they can give away the AI for free, which I'm sure is part of the strategic calculus for why they chose to open source it. And I would see something similar with DeepSeek as well, in that the skill set to do AI is very similar to a hedge fund. There's algorithmic trading, there's predictive analytics, so you of course have to hire very advanced, highly skilled mathematicians, even theoretical physicists to do this work, because at the end of the day, it's really just a lot of math. So I think this, again, is part of the strategic calculus for DeepSeek. The other thing I would add here, too, is that this is an enormous win for China by making it open source, because China has been positioning itself as a provider of global public goods, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, and now an open source AI model that anyone in the world, especially those in the global south, can use. So unless something dramatically changes, I see a pretty bright future for DeepSeek. And, I think, of course, it's natural to complain about the lack of access to high-end NVIDIA chips. But at the same time, there's a saying that extreme constraints leads to the greatest breakthroughs in design. And I think this is exactly what we're seeing here.
The Chat Lounge. The Chat Lounge unpacks views and opinions on hot issues in a more casual way.
Right, like you mentioned, it's something positive also agreed with by President Donald Trump. It's called DeepSeek, a wake-up call for American industries. You envision a rosy picture for DeepSeek, but it seems it already suffered some setback in the States because a lot of government departments, or not just in the States, in Australia as well, government officials are telling departments or some government-related companies to stop using DeepSeek. So,
well, if I may, just very briefly.
Sure.
This is inherently a political question, and I think we can look at TikTok for some guidance here. And I think whether that's DeepSeek or some other future tech company coming from China, as long as they can find a way to provide decisive political value to powerful leaders, they will find a way to thrive. So I think it's still very early, and again, it's very natural for the American government, the other Five Eyes governments, to all see this as a national security threat. But I think the next move will be on the part of DeepSeek or these other companies. DeepSeek's the product, but the company, to find a way, if that's part of their strategy. Because again, given the cost advantage that they have, I think there's going to be tremendous demand everywhere around the world for what they have to offer.
Can I make a bit of a prediction here,
Sure.
which is I think it's going to unfold like the internet's unfolded. Because essentially today we have two internets. We have the internet that runs in the West, providers like Google and Meta, and then in China you have all these alternative rival services, and it's in some sense it's almost like it's a separate internet. And the same is going to happen with AI. That because of these geopolitical tensions, they're going to be Western offerings and Chinese offerings, and people are going to choose whichever aligns with their geopolitics, not necessarily because the technology is going to be pretty comparable. Just like the internet providers, you have various internet services, social media, and so on.
But what if its access is totally banned? You cannot download it, right?
Well, we already have that. You can't access Google in China. So similarly, you won't be able to. Perhaps you're not going to be able to access TikTok in the West. You're going to restrictions. The firewalls are in place. Again, that reinforces, in a technical sense, the geopolitical separation that we have. We've ended up essentially with two internets. We'll end up with two AI worlds as well.
All right. And another question is: has DeepSeek R1's performance made Trump's $500 billion Stargate project obsolete?
Not at all. There's two fronts to the AI race. One is, who can build the best, smartest, cheapest AI models. And DeepSeek is definitely throwing the cat amongst the pigeons there as to, who's going to win that part of the race. But there's a second part of the race that we don't talk about much. It's not very visible, which is it's how you deliver those AI models. The infrastructure, the digital infrastructure that delivers the internet. We take it for granted that we can just, open Netflix and stream a movie and it's instantly there in high quality video. And we forget what goes into that. We forget that companies like Google own satellite networks, they own undersea cables, they own data centers in most countries. It takes a huge amount of infrastructure that they've been building, spending billions on for the last couple of decades, and they're now going to spend even more billions to actually provide, serve up those models at scale on a planetary-wide scale to billions of people. That's still going to need significant investments. Good news for those companies, actually. DeepSeek is actually fantastic good news for those companies because it tells them maybe they need slightly less infrastructure than they were planning because they can run on slightly smaller models. But you're still going to need huge amounts of infrastructure. You're still going to need those undersea cables. You're going to still need satellites. You're still going to need data centers to do the grunt work. So it's perhaps made those infrastructure investments a bit more manageable, a bit more reasonable, but you're still going to have to make those big bets.
But if DeepSeek puts those Wall Street wolves in awkward situation, would they, amass all measures they can to contain it, or?
I mean, let's not overreact here. I mean, in the tech stocks sell-off on Monday, actually some tech stocks went up. Amazon's tech stocks went up modestly because the market correctly foresaw that actually this is good news for Amazon, because most of Amazon's business is not AI models, but is that infrastructure, is all those data centers, Amazon Web Services. That's the most profitable part of Amazon as a business indeed. So that part of it, the delivering the AI infrastructure, still stands. And indeed, we know who wins that game. Certainly in the West, we know who wins that game. It's going to be those big tech giants. It's going to be the Googles and the Amazons. No one is going to be able to make the scale of investments necessary to be able to deliver it up. And similarly, the comparable Chinese alternatives again. And there's a huge amount of legacy hardware and infrastructure they've built. It'd be very hard to catch up with those. So it was always going to be a case, for example, that OpenAI partnered with someone like Microsoft to deliver their AI services. Anthropic have got in bed with Google. All the DeepSeek, I haven't checked, but DeepSeek won't necessarily be serving up all of their model. They'll be paying some web service to do that for them, who provided that infrastructure. That's that infrastructure has still got to be built and still be paid for. The good news is maybe we need slightly less of it than we thought we would.
Right. Actually, it's already under attack, and the company said all addresses were chased back to the States. That's not some good news for DeepSeek, right?
Not at all. But I'm sure that's a temporary.
Right.
They'll resolve that. And again, that's part of the infrastructure. You have to provide the infrastructure that's resistant to these, denial of service attacks. Again, that's all part of it. That's not really AI. That's part of the digital backbone that the internet and all our digital services run on. And again, people have to invest money to build that infrastructure so that it's resistant to the hackers and to mischievous people who want to cause you harm. So that's all part of delivering AI. You're going to have to be paid for that stuff as well. DeepSeek's model doesn't change any of that equation. You're still going to have to make those big investments to deliver digitally to people, the billions of people on the planet.
Right. It also has some other impact. DeepSeek was developed by a quantitative hedge fund company. So, Jiahe, what are the implications there? Going short on U.S. AI-related stocks?
Well, I really don't think DeepSeek has really that much things to do with the US-related, tech-related companies. I mean,
Right.
If we look at the bright side, what we're looking at is that the AI technology is now being used all around the world. They should be thriving about the tech companies. And basically speaking, if you look at the OpenAI and DeepSeek, all these companies' products, they are amazing. They are wonderful. But the question is that how much people are going to pay for them? So this is not a question that is you can find the answer by saying, okay, Chinese are coming for the job, so that we're not getting money because China is developing a cheaper model. It's not the case, because OpenAI itself is not making that much money at the moment. So it's always a question for the tech companies about where they are going to get the income, who is going to pay for them, especially for these kind of new AI programs. I mean, if you look at Apple, if you look at Amazon, they're already making quite a lot of money because they have made successful applications for their tech products and their programs. But for the OpenAI and DeepSeek, the question really is, who is going to pay? Are they going to get enough money? And that is really a hard question to answer, because it's not a traditional business pattern that we can find. We don't have this in the past. So it's reasonable for the analysts on the Wall Street and financial centers in Beijing to make predictions about the possibility in the future. But it's really hard to tell. You can only make predictions based on 70, 60% accuracy. So this is a question really facing the AI companies at the moment.
Okay, coming to our last question. Meta AI chief scientist Yann LeCun said people who see the performance of DeepSeek and think China is surpassing the US in AI, you are reading this wrong. So my question is, do you envision China being able to surpass the US in AI in the future? Or foreseeable future? Let's begin with maybe Andy?
Sure. Thank you, Chen. I believe that Jan LeCun believes that this is a triumph of open source, not necessarily the triumph of one country over another. But I will say, again, given the depth and breadth of China's technological talent pool, the size of its market, and the ferocity of the competition in the domestic market, that it would be quite remarkable if China did not establish leadership in key areas of artificial intelligence.
Thanks for that. And next, Jiahe, please.
Well, I think it's really difficult to tell whether China's going to surpass US or US is going to surpass China. I mean, currently it's very obvious that US is having quite a lot of leadership with tech companies, but China is following up. Currently, if you look at China's per capita GDP, we're about 1/5 of the United States or 1/6 of the United States. If you look at this from the per capita GDP, then we're lagging quite behind. If you look at the tech company, we are following up. But how do you evaluate that China surpasses the United States? Do you evaluate this from the number of companies that China is having compared with the US? Then China is definitely surpassing the United States because we've got 4 times larger the population. Are you looking at the value of the whole tech company, the whole tech industry? Then currently China is, following up, but it's not surpassing the US. But so in the future, I think the more possible cases will be that China and the US are leading in their own perspectives, the tech industry, and each has their own unique advantages. I mean, US is, for example, US is very advanced with basic mathematics and physics, which China is trying to catch up but still lagging behind. But if you look at e-commerce, China got a much larger e-commerce market because we got a larger consumption market. So each market or each country and economy will have their leading aspect. There is no direct competition, say who is a winner is going to lose. We are both going to have very thriving tech markets in the future, and we can definitely learn a lot from each other. I think that's the meaning of modern economics. It's not finding out who's winning, who's losing, but both are thriving out from the development of technology.
Fair enough. And last but not least, Professor Walsh, please.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's one winner. I mean, it's like saying, AI is often compared to electricity. We didn't have one winner of electricity. China is a major user of electricity, and they've got some wonderful companies that build electrical devices, just as the US is, just as Germany is, just as lots of countries get to use electricity, exploit it, profit from it. The same is going to be true for AI. So it's going to be ubiquitous technology. Intelligence is widely distributed around the planet. There's 8 billion intelligence around the planet. I predict there's going to be 8 billion artificial intelligence around the planet. There won't be one winner. The DeepSeek news, though, is good news because it actually demonstrates that it is going to be available, not just to the open AIs and the Googles with the deep pockets to build it. It's going to be available to lots of people with much shallower pockets.
Hopefully, the US side, especially US government officials, can realize that too. And with that, we wrap up this session of the Chat Lounge. Many thanks to Professor Toby Walsh, Chief Scientist from the AI Institute, University of New South Wales, Australia; Chen Jiahe, Chief Investment Officer of Beijing-based Novem Arcae Technologies; and Andy Mok, Senior Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization, for sharing your insights. The show is available on all major podcast platforms. Please email us your comments at radio@cgtn.com. I'm Tuyun. Thank you for listening. We'll have more chat at the Chat Lounge next week.
I cannot marry you while your mother regards me.
Step into the world of timeless elegance with Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a captivating audiobook by Edith Eaton, read by Manling.
Because the green leaf still clings to the bough.
Experience the lively yet complex lives in Chinese American communities at the turn of the 20th century as Edith Eaton's delicate prose weaves together themes of tradition, change, love, and identity.
Forget all that belongs to the joy of life.
Follow the journey of Mrs. Spring Fragrance and witness the struggles and fights of those living on a rapidly changing exotic land while holding on to their cultural traditions, or more importantly, to their
He
identities.
could hardly believe that his daughter was seriously opposed to becoming the wife of such a good-looking, prosperous young merchant as Wang Ling.
Join Books and Beyond for Mrs. Spring Fragrance. Let the stories come to life in your imagination. Subscribe to Books and Beyond for free on your favorite podcast platforms or log on to radio.cgtn.com for more.
Sideline Story brings you all things sports related. The hottest topics, latest events, juiciest stories, all with a very personal take. Subscribe to Sideline Story Podcast for heated sports discussions covering events that are happening in China and around the world.